Writer and historian Patrick French's latest book is India, a Portrait. Earlier in the program, we talked about the first section of the book, which is Rashtra, a history of modern India and the dominance of dynastic politics in the country. And now we come to the second section of the book, which is called Lakshmi. And Patrick, you say that this is the most important segment. So can you elaborate?
Well, I think that probably when India became independent, that politics were at the center of everything for several decades while people worked out how the country was going to work. But since the economic reforms of the early 90s, there's been a takeoff, which has meant that the economy and the new wealth that's been generated has driven a lot of what's happened. And so I don't think that everything has to focus on politicians. Now it's business people, but it's also anybody in a way who has moved forward through economic change, who's at the center of what's happening.
But look at the contradiction. You have millionaires on the one hand, liberalization. And on the other hand, you have so much poverty. You have people who have to struggle for one meal a day. So I get a bit put off by all this gushy writing about the tech savviness of our country and how Indians have made it abroad and how there are so many people in Silicon Valley and so on and so forth. And I actually miss Mr. Nepal's scathing criticism, when he talks about some of the things that are going wrong in our country. What do you feel about that?
Well, about 20 million people are having a second meal a day every year who didn't have it the previous year. And one of the things I noticed when I was doing the book was that in the 1970s, per capita GDP was lower than it was between 1900 and 1947, which was one of the worst periods of British rule. So clearly there are great inequalities now, but at least for many people there's the chance that things could be different. In other words, when wealth is generated at high speed, when you have an 8.5% growth rate in any country, then of course you're going to have billionaires against people who are in poverty. But fundamentally, unless the country becomes richer, then nobody's going to become richer.
So you're not dismissing what I say as leftist critique, you're not
Well,
dismissing
I'm not,
me.
because the thing is that in the places where I've been to, for example in Andhra Pradesh, where the Maoists are very strong, when I've looked at some construction projects in Bangalore and been to the accommodation of the workers, who are mainly Biharis and Bengalis, it's deeply shocking. It's terrible to see, particularly when you know that the apartments that are being built in Bangalore are selling for 2 or 3 or 4 crores each. In other words, it's not an embedded social problem that nobody can change for decades. It's simply people not bothering to look after their workers properly.
But you're very optimistic in the sense that you say that the changes in the social and in the economic sphere will change the political sphere, because that's where the stagnation is, right?
Well, I think in a way politics becomes sidelined. It becomes less important when things are happening in other spheres.
And going back to the first section, there was something I wanted to ask you, which I didn't, about dynastic politics.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to read something from that section. And I'm going to rearrange the sentences a bit, if you don't mind.
You're welcome to rearrange my work.
Nehru, Patel, VP Menon and others went to enormous lengths to make sure that heredity was knocked aside as a criterion for rule, and to ensure the 554 princely states were absorbed into a modern and democratic nation. The Indian constitution was based on the principle that sovereignty was derived from the people. The Indian Republic was founded on the truth that power should not be handed over by the colonial rulers to the princes. India's next general election was likely to return not a Lok Sabha, a house of the people, but a Vansh Sabha, a house of dynasty. And along with your data fiend friends, you've put together some very alarming statistics that there's a great dependence on nepotism, on inheritance, and what do you call it? You call it HMP, which is hereditary MP.
Yes.
So is that the way we're going? Is that something we have to be really worried about?
Well, it was an extraordinary survey. The results were surprising. I don't think anybody would have imagined that you'd have a situation where 2/3 of MPs under the age of 40 are hereditary. And the complete data set is all there online for people to see on www.theindiasite.com. And you can look on there and discover how your MP got into politics, look at the difference between different regions and different parties and different age groups. And it's something that could change. If people don't want nepotism in politics, then they have to generate a process where people are chosen for seats on merit. And it's possible that could turn around in the next 10 years. So the Vanch Sabha is more like a possibility than a certainty.
Will you tell us a little more about the site that you were talking about?
The website?
Yes.
Well, it came out of an idea that there was a need for a website which had information, partly that I couldn't put into the book because there was so much of it. I mean, the data that we collected for some parts of the book, you know, if you were going to fill 10 pages at the back of the book, it was much more interesting to put it online on the India site. But the other hope of the website is that it'll turn into something which will be, you know, more kind of open-ended. So it's full of news stories from across India which are updated several times each day.
So you're going to have different people contributing, or will it just be you?
At the moment, there are a whole range of different people who are putting up ideas for stories, and I have a kind of general oversight of what goes up. But not every word written on the site is mine by any means.
You know, I know that you spend about 10 years before researching before you write a book, which is what you did for your first book on India and this too. Mm-hmm. And I know you've been asked this question many, many times, but how does it feel to write about a country that's not your own? How confident do you feel?
Well, there are a lot of subjects in this book that I would not have felt confident writing about before. Caste, the position of Indian Muslims, religion. These are difficult subjects, even if you come from deep inside a society. And it's really only after having been in and out of India for more than 20 years that I felt ready to write about them. And, you know, take, for example, a subject like caste. Generally, to outsiders, the whole truth is never expressed. And it took a long time to realize some of those complexities and how they really worked.
So you see, as a member of the Chennai audience, I asked you the question very politely. Patrick says that the Chennai audience is very, very polite as compared to audiences in other cities.
Well, yes? I did notice that compared to Delhi, for example. I mean, you know, there are quite startling cultural differences in different parts of India, and also, you know, different people from different places, the Bengalis, Punjabis, Tamilians, whatever. Everybody will have, you know, different stereotypes of the other group. And, you know, most of that interaction is quite good-natured. But at the Delhi launch, there were kind of standoffs between different groups expressing their points of view. For example, one audience member who said, you know, to a geneticist who appears in the book, who happened to be in the audience, can you prove genetically that people from the south of India are cleverer than people from the north? And, you know, to her disappointment, he said, no, you can't prove it.
Well, I'm going to ask you some more polite questions. We're not done yet. We have to talk about the third section of the book, which is called Samaj. I'm in conversation with writer and historian Patrick French.